Parents Gone Wild.
She's 16! You sick.
You had a guy in your closet at 2:30 in the morning.
And viral.
You're never gonna be able to work in elementary ever again when I'm done with you.
Those are my children!
What got you so upset that you started live streaming?
I was really mad.
The school, when they saw this, went on lockdown.
Oh.
And guess what?
It gets worse.
How could it possibly get any worse? Oh, that's right. Okay, so I'm not the first person to expose Dr. Phil, and I definitely won't be the last. But unlike many who debunk this show, I am one of the select few who actually took the time to look into the show and break it down through qualitative data to create a research analysis on the issues surrounding this program. That issue, of course, being, and the central focus of my research, does Dr. Phil exploit people for his own personal gain through the use of sensationalistic shock value? Now, I know what you might be thinking, and the obvious answer is... But it isn't enough to just inherently know something, especially without explaining how you got there, and that's what this iSearch is about, exploring how I came to this conclusion and the process it took to get there. I want to begin talking on the clip I opened up with in this video, because yes, it has a purpose for being there. When we look at this ad, we see a great deal of emotions displayed with labels to quickly describe the emotions felt. Already, just at the surface level, we are seeing clips being taken out of context to entice the viewer. And that's how I found her. Yes, her. Cassie Maxwell, a 37-year-old woman from Roseau, Minnesota, who live-streamed on Facebook April 26, 2019, after being served a no trespassing order from her kid's school. I first discovered Cassie back in 2019 during this exact commercial segment for the Parenting Gone Wild that Dr. Phil had previewed on the OWN network. Of course, since I was young and I wasn't really aware about the rigid structure that television programming had, I missed the episode, but many months later my mind still pondered on who this woman was. And why was she so mad? Spoilers ahead, everyone. Dr. Phil is one of the many generic daytime television talk shows on the We Couldn't Successfully Imitate the Discovery Health Channel network. It was created by Oprah Winfrey. A fraud! And executively produced by many other money-hungry capitalists. Now, I'm sure you're wondering how I came across this information, and you would be right to assume that I did indeed just open up my handy-dandy iPhone and search up some basic information into my Google bar to get a historical synopsis of the show. Yes, obvious words and phrases like Dr. Phil Wiki or Dr. Phil Show Information and Phony Phil. Okay, so maybe not that one, but you get the idea. Nothing too intensive to understand the background on the show and how I came to surface. So if you're still not familiar on what the Dr. Phil Show is and all of its allegedly self-proclaimed values, which will be important throughout the video, let me give you a little abstract on what this hullabaloo of a show is. So this show is about this guy who's a doctor, and his name is Philip Kelvin McGraw, aka Dr. Phil, aka the guy made by Oprah, aka what? This guy doesn't even have a medical license to administer any of the psychological or psychiatric help he gives, which we'll cover in a bit. The show started back in 2002, and according to Dr. Phil, had the goal of bringing psychology into the nation's living rooms. In a selective interview with Lori Myers, one of Dr. Phil's staff members, he implies that he sees himself on his platform not as his guest therapist, despite giving medical and therapeutic advice, but as a moderator who hopefully gives people who are suffering in silence some steps they can take toward finding help. Now, as inspiring and properly intended as that may seem, the show has very strict guidelines for guests who can come onto the show and a notorious reputation for blatantly attacking people's characters that don't conform to the rules of the show. Let's take a look at what Dr. Phil said to one of his guests who are nervous about appearing on stage.
I've offered to help
Can
you.
we sit down and
You
talk?
either want to talk to me or you don't. I've had about enough of this. I'm either going to talk to you or I'm going to talk about you.
So I'm either going to talk to you or I'm going to talk about you.
Is that how you want to be talked to if you're dealing with mental health problems? Yeah. Probably not. There also is no forewarning. Dr. Phil kind of just does this on a case-to-case basis with his guests. There is no true progression of the Dr. Phil show being a teaching tool for those that struggle with mental health problems, despite the illusion of one. Now, if I were to point out every mistake made in every episode, we'd be here for about 72 hours, and ain't nobody got time for that. Luckily, I don't have to, as the Dr. Phil show follows a pretty basic and conspicuous formula with the once-in-a-blue-moon clever script, making almost every episode of the show the same episode. Here's how that formula goes. So the show always starts off with Dr. Phil addressing himself like the egomaniac he is, and then goes into previewing his client's issues before feeding into a whole host of condescending, overly critical advice given by Dr. Phil himself, before connecting the client to actually qualified professionals. Yeah, the show hasn't been too clear on why, if Dr. Phil has the resources to connect people with qualified professionals in the first place, why not just skip the middleman and do this to begin with? And if you were wondering the same thing, well, great job. You're already seeing the problem with this show. And in fact, the overarching ploy for gaining viewers has become so significantly obvious over the years that there's a whole episode dedicated to it. Buckle up, ladies and gentlemen, because the eye search is about to begin. Have you ever watched something and wondered if it was real? And no, I don't mean seeing a CGI clip of Bigfoot on YouTube. I'm talking about questioning an individual's credibility and his or her position of power based on the actions they took in direct comparison to the things they say. For example, politicians are supposed to represent the people and support legislation that corresponds to their supposed values that they pontificated all throughout their campaign. But if the individual chosen doesn't accurately represent the people they were elected by, people begin taking notice and end up calling that person out. This is because what they said they would do is in direct conflict with what they are doing. The same thing happens on reality TV, especially educational programming. Dr. Phil puts forth all of his supposed values and principles for his show, but throughout the course of time, we are constantly seeing behavior conflicting with these values and principles. I first took notice with this in the Parenting Gone Wild episode where Dr. Phil takes advantage of Cassie, not only negating his own structure of how guests appear on the show by reaching out to her, but acknowledging that she has bipolar disorder, which causes her to have unregulated emotions and behaviors when she goes into states of mania, then completely disregarding the help she needs to overcome her mental illness. He uses her viral video as a way of showcasing bad parenting or a way to be mindful before pressing record on your phone, but doesn't focus or treat what the problem actually is. Don't believe me? Well, maybe you'll believe Cassie. I interviewed Cassie on Thursday, October 21st of 2021 over Zoom. I was able to connect with Cassie over Instagram over the past few months after I finished watching her segment on Dr. Phil. We FaceTimed discussing our experiences with mental health, and I later reached out to her again for my interview. My interview with Cassie presents the most honorable way of analyzing the truth of skewed television through the personal framework of an individual who has lived to tell the tale. What I mean by this is who better to ask the flaws of a show that preys on vulnerable people than somebody who went on the show themselves. Cassie's interview helps us to understand how reality television distorts the way in which we view people and how it only serves to profit those at the top involved. The interview includes, but is not limited to, who she is, how she got on the Dr. Phil show, her experience on the show, how Dr. Phil and his producers treated her, the legitimacy of the resources that Dr. Phil provides for his clients, and how the Dr. Phil show has impacted Cassie since she's been out, and what she would do about the Dr. Phil show in order to make it less exploitative. So let's see what Cassie has to say. First of all, who even is she?
Well, my name is Cassie Maxwell. I am a mom of two, a dog mom of two. I'm a pretty happy-go-lucky person. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder in 2016. So my life has kind of been a little bit of a roller coaster since 2016, but I've been stable now for the last 2 years. So that's been really fantastic.
So now that you have an idea of who she is from her own words, let's start looking at the main issues. I mentioned earlier that Dr. Phil and his producers had actually reached out to Cassie about her viral video, wanting her to come on the show, which is not at all how Dr. Phil structures his show. Typically, guests have to write in and then be assessed to come on. This was not the case, as Cassie agreed, stating,
"Oh, I actually didn't have to do anything to get on the show. They contacted me and asked me if I wanted to be on the show, which is was new to me because I was under the impression that in order to be on a TV show, you had to put in a request. But they reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to be on there on the show. They did not specify what I was going to be on the show for. They just said it was because of that viral video.
This is a perfect example of Dr. Phil exploiting people for sensationalistic shock value. Dr. Phil not only went against his own rules and reached out to Cassie to be on the show, but also only asked her to be there because her video went viral, in addition to Cassie being a mother, which was the exact content he was looking for in his Parenting Gone Wild segment. Had this not been the case, Cassie likely would not have even been on the show. So why did she go on the show if she was going to to be exploited, you ask? Well, the thing is, Cassie didn't know she was going to be exploited when she went on the show. She was under the impression that she was going to get help from Dr. Phil, insisting...
Led my mom to believe that they were going to help me, like, get care from Dr. Phil, like, go through his care, like, when he sends people away to get help and to get, like, care from his show. My mom was under the impression that was going to happen with me, and she was really disappointed at the show because none of that really actually took place.
That's right. Dr. Phil led someone in desperate need to believe that they were going to get help, but instead he did this.
A couple things. You might want to work on your vocabulary.
A little bit.
Okay, so what about the resources Dr. Phil provides? Are those at least helpful? No, not really. And for someone that claims
I do my homework.
wouldn't send kids to a ranch that uses trauma therapy to help and change the kids' life around. Nor would someone who argues that they do people's stories because he thinks
It's a teachable moment and not for sensationalistic shock value.
put somebody on his show specifically for ratings without any consideration to the censorship needed for what that person's saying. What I mean is Dr. Phil will let this on his show.
I know I'm a Caucasian because when I wake up in the morning, I just have such a great life. And that my hair is so perfect, my skin isn't ugly, and I'm not fat also, which is also a really African-American thing. So, like, I'm just nowhere near like them. And plus, they're so thug and criminal that I can't relate.
Oh, but this is not allowed.
If you think I exploit people, every time you bring a guest on this show, you exploit them and spread whatever problems they have to the whole world. You think that's helping them?
Yeah, keep telling yourself that. You can go.
Which brings me to my next academic sources, Nina's Sister Treasure and reality TV, realism and revelation. Once again, because this is a research process, I do need to tell you how and why the following sources are going to be important, as well as how I located them and what they will be used for in this video. Oh, yes, I know, you want to get straight to the point and see all the piping hot tea, but I also need to pass this class, so bear with me. Plus, how many people do you know tell you how they got their answer? Exactly, none, so enjoy. And yes, I will try to be Speedy Gonzalez about it because we are well into this video. Alright, so in order to find this source, I had to do some basic questioning of this one episode on Dr. Phil where this young 16-year-old girl named Treasure is on the show because apparently she's a racist against her own race? Yeah, incredibly sus. And if you watch the entire episode, you basically see her trolling the entire time. But good old Dr. Phil claimed all throughout the show that he believed in doing this segment not for sensationalistic shock value, and that he does his homework, yet to no avail, he proves completely incompetent and hypocritical again, as Nina Kimberly, Treasure's sister, speaks out about the show, proving that she is a credible source and she has evidence to substantiate that she is Treasure's sister, and heavily desecrates Dr. Phil for not doing an inch of background information on Treasure as she had warrants out for CPS. Nina specifically expresses this on her Instagram Live, clapping back at the Dr. Phil show and her sister, declaring,
She's on the run from CPS. She is basically a criminal. She hasn't been to school in years, and her school would call and leave phone calls looking for her, saying where she's at. My mom lost custody because she was going to go to jail because Treasure stopped going to school for a while.
After watching this entire episode on YouTube back in 2018, this is when I realized Dr. Phil uses people as stepping stones to make points in his show without giving any care to the defamation of someone's character. This is clearly evident when Nina talks about how they use Nina's stepfather and make him out to be a white supremacist during the show. Now, real quick, because I didn't mention, I was able to watch this episode off of YouTube. I was subscribed to Dr. Phil's channel and I got a notification to watch some of the clips because he doesn't put the full episodes of any of his show all on YouTube. After watching copious amounts of Hella Sus, I decided that I was gonna see if this was real. I went into my YouTube search bar and looked up Dr. Phil Treasure Exposed, and to my satisfaction, good old SS Sniper Wolf proved all of my skepticisms were true. Which of course then led me to Nina's video, and I watched the full 18 minutes of it to see what she had to say. Which I just previously mentioned include the character assassination of direct and indirect guests on the Dr. Phil show. What I mean by indirect guests is people who aren't directly on the show but are still talked about. Nina substantiates this, revealing,
So basically your mom and her maid of the story trying to get a bag. Yep, trying to be internet famous. But if they would have came up with anything else, I'd have been fine. But the fact that they came up with putting my dad out there, making him seem like a white supremacist. This is a man who I love, who raised me, who did nothing but treat us with kindness and love us since day one. So I can't stand by that.
Treasure and her mother's purpose for doing all this, you ask? Well, let's see what Nina has to say.
All of this was just for an all-expense paid trip. They did not get paid anything. They just were flown out for free and, be able to eat what they want and stuff like that.
The points made in Nina's live, as well as Cassie's interview, corroborate really well with reality TV, Realism and Revelation by Anita Briesi. This book, which was published by Columbia University Press in 2015, explores the concerns that lead into the ethical debates which have focused on the representation of individual voices across large media platforms to define what we take as the boundaries of reality TV. In order to find this article, I had to browse through the Wayne State University library site, also known as Summon, that our teacher introduced us to in class. But it didn't stop there. Not only did I have to narrow down the search result and keywords in order to find relevant information that would support the argumentation of my research, but I also had to make sure it consisted of claims that were central to my own. So as I read the article, I figured the main claim that is being made by the author is that there are political and cultural agendas in reality TV which create false interpretations of how people live and view their self-image and are inherently disingenuous to the context of the changing social world. This is best aggravated in chapter 1 of Briesi's book, where she formulates that reality TV is more concerned with parent power or capital power than it is with electoral power. That meaning that the cultural politics is used implicitly to create a social difference rather than unite people together. Now, if you have no idea what the is going on and you just sat there like,
How can that blah, blah, blah.
Basically, Briesi is saying exactly what Dr. Phil does. Rather than using a show to bring people who have mental illness or difficult problems together, he capitalizes on them as a way to gain power, aka get that. Before we close out today's video, guys, I want to talk about Dr. Phil's qualifications to administer advice and his malpractice as a healthcare advisor, which are covered in my 2 popular sources. To find each of these sources, I had to use Google by simply searching phrases like Dr. Phil exploiting people and using an attachment word with terms like mental health or mental illness. I had to use Google as I could no longer find relevant information that covers this topic on scholarly engines or YouTube. I was able to find articles relatively quickly and assess the reliability and relevance of the piece if it should fit into my work, which of course both did. The article, Dr. Phil Has Decades of Controversy That Have Followed Him His Whole TV Career by Devin McGinnis, overviews Dr. Phil's career by comparing the structural framework to that of a normal healthcare worker who would operate to that of how Dr. Phil operates. Published August 18th of 2021 on the Distractify website, Guinness's article raises some major talking points as a whole. How many healthcare advocates and professionals are practicing without a license, and how are they getting past this? Why aren't these people like Dr. Phil who are falsely providing help being taken down from their role? McGinnis's research explains that if he never bills anybody for counseling services, he very well might not be covered by HIPAA, which means depending on the licensing, he may not have professional ethical obligations either. And because the Dr. Phil Show is a talk show and Dr. Phil merely a talk show host, he does not require any licensing. So great job, Dr. Phil. That's precisely how you get past the system. Now, normally healthcare professionals or advisors who give this type of advice are required to patient oaths and ethics. But not Dr. Phil. This is perfectly discussed in my last source. Jonah Frank's article, published on Social Science Weekly, February 26 of 2020, How Dr. Phil Exploits the Mentally Ill for Public Amusement, directly correlates with the writings of Anna Briesi and functions to corroborate with the messages and information in Briesi's work, as it stems from the same rhetorical approach, using a perspective of media to question the representation of that media and the actions that happens to see if it makes sense. Frank's article, addressing the value of the Hippocratic oath that healthcare professionals make to never compromise on a patient's quality or promptness of care for any reason, especially for personal gain, which is simply not the case on the Dr. Phil Show or in any of Dr. Phil's ulterior motive. But that doesn't stop people from enjoying the show. The public's appetite for seeing people get roasted is insatiable, and who could become more vulnerable target than the mentally ill? And who better to find their weakest point than a former clinical psychologist? Who would have guessed a degree in treating mental illness could amount to one exploiting it? Given the right person, Dr. Phil, it turns out, is the right person. That's because he's an entertainer and has disavowed the idea that he is providing therapy. But then what is he doing? I mean, it seems like therapy. The only moments where it diverges are when he gestures to the crowd for praise or finds a way to draw its ire. Look, it'd be different if his guests left feeling informed and ready to take on the world, but that's hardly the case. Often the show portrays deeply wounded individuals embarrassing themselves on national television, and Dr. Phil's a party to this. How can a show that claimed to be educational and informative be a teaching tool for others when it's built on lies, unprofessionalism, and profitability? On a final note, even if you don't watch the show or you think everything I said was bullshit, I want to at least leave you with this. Please, please, please take notice of what you watch. Your teachers aren't crazy. People are using rhetorical strategies and appealing to your emotions and sensibilities every day to either get you to do something or make you feel some type of way. Sometimes more clear, other times very subtle, but no matter the case, there's always a reason someone is putting something out there. It's your job to ask why. So that's a wrap on today's video, guys. Thank you so much for sticking around if you were able to watch the full thing, and I hope you were able to learn something. And if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, go ahead and drop them in the comments section below. Otherwise, if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a big thumbs up, and if you want to see more videos like it, make sure to subscribe. Till next time.